produce more than others. I think that's a truism. Secondly, I believe that we consume almost equally. The strong eat nearly as much as the weak, and the old eat nearly as much as the strong or the young. A few years ago, I was on a speaking tour. I spoke to a lot of luncheon groups, and I noticed that every time at a luncheon, the waitress brought out equal portions. Everybody got the same plate with a little piece of beef or chicken or something, and 11 peas by actual count, and a little mashed potatoes, and everybody got the same plate. But I sat down beside a man who must have weighed, in one example, must have weighed at least 285 pounds. He was rather large. He was a weightlifter probably. That man could probably outproduce me 10 to 1. But we both got the same plate with a piece of chicken, 11 peas, and a mashed potato and some gravy. But I would say even if he sat down and tried to out-eat me, he would eat only 2 or maybe 3 times as much as me. Also, I want you to remember one more thing. In our little example, we're going to show you in a few minutes, G, the one on the bottom, is unable but not unwilling to work. In other words, G is the one we're concerned about because G is either old or infirm or is a child. Now let's take our 7 men on the island, A, B, C, etc., through G, and put them on an island, number 40. Here we have the unequal production. A in our example is this strong man, the man that sat down beside me, weighs 285 pounds. He's able to produce in 1 year 1,200 units. Call it what you want to, bushels or acres or whatever, but he produces 1,200. B produces 750, C produces 600. These are the 3 in the prosperous valley. D, E, F, and G are the 4 in the other valley, and D produces 400, E 300, F 250, and G only nothing. Now I want you to be concerned about G because G is unable, not unwilling. Everybody is working to their utmost capacity in my little example. Now, since we say that even though we produce unequally, we consume equally, let's take the production and divide it equally. Number 41. If we take our 3,500 units that were produced unequally and divide them equally, everybody gets 500 units. Obviously, A might eat a little bit more than G, but just for the sake of argument, I believe it's a truism that people produce unequally but consume equally. Now let's say in number 42, what happens here? Let's take a look at this. Number A, or letter A rather, produces 1,200 units, consumes 500, is therefore producing a surplus of 700 units. So A has a surplus of 700 units more than his or her production. B has a surplus of 250, C has a surplus of 100. Now we have deficits. People consume more than they produce. D produces 400, consumes 500, obviously needs 100 of someone else's units. E produces 300, consumes 500, has a deficit of 200 units, and obviously F is 250 production, 500 consumption for a deficit of 200. But let's look at G in our little example. G is unable, not unwilling to work. G needs 500 units to survive that year. Now we have a problem. Do A, B, and C have the right to keep their surplus? If somebody takes that surplus, it's called stealing, isn't it? Yes, each person on that sequence, A through G, has the right to private property. They have it equally, even though some have more property than others. Now, do the producers, A, B, and C, have the right to protect their property if someone comes to steal it? Yes. The right to private property implies the right to self-defense. Without the food that they produce, man will starve. Do A, B, and C have the right to leave the country if the others, D, E, F, and G, continue to steal from them? Tough question, isn't it? But yes, they have the right, don't they? It's called the right to travel, to be free. Others in Russia don't agree, and they build iron curtains, don't they, to keep A, B, and C in. Why do they build iron curtains? They need the producers in a society that discourages production, don't they? If A, B, and C want to get out of Russia, they can't because there's an iron curtain. you will stay and provide for D, E, F, and G. Now, all of economics is concerned with the question of how do we get the surplus from those who produce more than they consume down to D, E, F, and G. There are only two ways to do this. Either you do it voluntarily, and I call that charity, or you do it coercively, and I call that welfare. We're going to continue our discussion of welfare to show you it is legalized stealing. I'd like to talk about the biggest producer, A, in my example. Now, we've been told that these people, A and others like him, keep their wealth, their surplus to themselves. They make certain that the poor get nothing. That's what we've been told. The wealthy always keep their money and they don't share, right? Perhaps one of the best examples of this view is the cartoon character Uncle Scrooge, drawn by the Disney Studios, I believe. I want you to notice that I spare no expense in providing the highest quality teaching aids for this lecture series. This is a table mat that I found at a fast food restaurant one night. And so I bought it and said, I'm going to use it because it illustrates Uncle Scrooge in his vault. There you can see him, skiing down a hill of money with Huey, Dewey, and Louie playing with the money. So here we see this very idea that these very wealthy keep their money in a vault and they play with it and count it and keep it away from the poor. And I asked myself, is that a true representation of the people who produce more than they consume? And I think you would agree with me, it is not. People who produce more than they consume find ways to get that surplus out into the marketplace. They seek profits for their wealth. That which they save, the surplus, they've got to find ways to get it to D, E, F, and G, don't they? They don't hide it in vaults and play with it or conceal it. They put it out because they want to make a profit. And the greatest profit is made when they get it to D, E, F, and G, isn't it? The masses. This cartoon that we just looked at depicts a fraud, a hoax. Why? To get us to pass graduated income taxes to, quote, soak the rich, unquote. And then the very wealthy, who have created this image, falsely I believe, get the laws passed to protect their wealth. Isn't that interesting? These wealthy, A, B, and C, get laws such as tax loopholes, tax-free foundations, and tax shelters. In other words, we don't tax the very wealthy, do we? And then these very wealthy make certain that the middle classes pay the taxes. Their ultimate goal is, as it has always been, to destroy the middle class. Now we're going to show you in some examples later in this series just how the very wealthy have created a thing called communism to destroy the middle class. Over and over again, in every communist revolution we're going to study, we're going to see that. The purpose of communism is to destroy the middle class. It doesn't care about D, E, F, and G. Now let's get back to our 7-man example. Let's just presume that the 4 people vote the property, the surplus away the first year. So in other words, that surplus of 500 units for letter A is now voted to be given to D, E, F, and G. And the surplus that B produced is now being voted to be taken away, and the surplus that C produced is being voted away. And let's just say that after that voting is over, A, B, and C sit down and decide to produce only what they consumed the year before. Let's now see what happens. Number 43. Here we have A, B, and C deciding to produce only what they consumed the year before. A consumed 500, so he produces 500. B consumed 500, so he produces only 500. C consumes 500, so he produces 500. Now, each one of these people is capable of producing far more, aren't they? In other words, they don't work as hard because they feel that the majority does not have the right to vote it away. I'd like to ask you this question. Do people have the right not to produce what they're capable of producing? And I think you would agree with me, of course they do. Can D, E, F, and G force A, B, and C to produce to their capability? No. What is it called if one group of people force other people to work. It is called slavery, isn't it? In America, slavery is illegal. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution reads, number 44, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, shall exist within the United States, unquote. It is immoral to force one man to serve another. It is illegal to force one man to serve another, according to the 13th Amendment of the Constitution. Can D, E, F, and G build a wall to keep A, B, and C there if they choose to leave? No, because man is free to travel, isn't he? The only way you can keep them there is to build an iron curtain. And that's exactly what Russia has done, because it wants to keep the producers, those who produce more than they consume, inside the country. They need them, don't they? Without the production of A, B, and C, there is less for D, E, F, and G to consume, as we shall see in a few more minutes. Now let's go back to our example. D, E, F, and G continue as before. They say to themselves, we'll continue to produce as we did before. Now let's look at what happens in our little 7 men on the island, number 45. Here we have the A, B, and C once again producing what they consumed the year before, 500 units. D says, I'll continue to produce just as I did before, E, F, and G. Our new total of production is now down to 2,450 units. Now, since I said that all people consume equally, let's take that unequal production and divide it equally. 2,450 divided by 7, number 46, is exactly 350 units per person. So here we have, once again, unequal production, 2,450 units being divided, and we have equal consumption, 350 units apiece. A gets 350, so does G. Each man gets an equal share of the production. Notice the production in our little example dropped from 3,500 units to 2,450, and the consumption per capita, meaning each person, dropped from 500 to 350. Isn't that interesting? This is the reason that force fails. You cannot divide unproduced goods. You cannot force people to produce. If you destroy incentive, you destroy production. You can't force people to work when they don't want to work. What is the best incentive to get people to produce? It's not fear or force. Man's inalienable right, his God-given right to keep that which he has produced. It's called the right to private property. That is the incentive that encourages people to produce more than they consume. But we're not through with our little example, as we're going to see. Let's continue now. We've got to answer one more question. How do we provide for G, the person that's unable to work? He's not unwilling, he's unable. There are only, as I said, 2 ways to do that. Number 47. We can distribute this surplus by force, and we can call that welfare, or we can distribute this surplus by love and call it charity. Those are the only 2 ways we can take it. Either we take it with love or by force. If we take it by force, I call it welfare. If we take it by love, I call it charity. Those are the only 2 ways you could get the surplus from A, B, and C down to D, E, F, and G. I want to give you an example of this thing and show you just how it works. And this is a real-life history story. This happened. This happened in America's early history, back in the days of the Pilgrims. They tried the 2 systems and put them side by side. And we can know with historical accuracy just what happens when you decide to take someone's property from another person. The early Pilgrims took the land when they landed in the United States and said everybody owns everything in common, and we'll build a storehouse, and everybody puts into the storehouse that which they produce, and everybody takes out that which they need. Everybody puts in, everybody takes out. You can have whatever you want, just take what you need. And you know what happened? People starved, didn't they? It didn't work. There was starvation because everybody says, gee, I don't really feel like working today. I remember old Harry's out there. Harry's going to work for me. So I'll let Harry work. I'll go fishing today, or I'll go camping, or do something else, play softball maybe. Okay? This system did not work. Even voluntarily it didn't work. Finally, and you can read this in the diaries of both Governor Bradford and Governor Morris, I believe his name was, or Smith, whatever it is, of the two governors of Plymouth and Jamestown. They both wrote about this system, and they said it didn't work. They decided the way to get enough food for everybody is to take away this system and try another one, the right to private property. So they took the land and divided it so that every family had an equal share. And then they said, family A, this is your piece of land. Family B, this is your piece of land. C, etc. And then they said, all that you produce belongs to you. And you know what happened? It's strange, but it worked. There was overproduction under this system. There was so much being produced, they had the first Thanksgiving and invited the Indians in to share their bounty. This system outproduced that system probably 10 or 20 to 1. In fact, I think even in the diaries they say it was 10 to 1. Why? Because man had the right to private property. If we expect someone else to work for us, nothing is produced. If we decided to put this system in by force, it wouldn't work, because no one will work when they're forced to work. This system has failed throughout history. It has always failed. It always will fail, and it's failing even today all around the world. This system is called communism, isn't it? Communism has failed worldwide. If you want to call it socialism, it has failed worldwide. In every instance, either by force or even voluntarily. It failed here voluntarily, didn't it? You can't force people to work. If they can't keep that which they produce, they will not produce. That's a law of human nature. This system, the right to private property, will produce. We're going to show you examples later on in the series, once again, of comparisons between this system and this. They are happening right now in East Germany and West Germany, China and Taiwan. You can see them side by side. And this system has always failed. It always will fail. It doesn't work. Even if you try it by force, you will work. You will produce. It doesn't work. The right to private property is the key to abundance. If you grant me the right to keep what I produce, if you recognize my God-given right, I will produce, and we will share. It's the secret of wealth. Now, we've defined democracy as the rule by the majority. So we must ask the question, do majorities have the right to vote the rights away from the minorities? And I say they do not. And here's why. Number 48. Majorities do not determine right and wrong. Right is right, though everyone votes against it. And wrong is wrong, though all but God favor it. Majorities do not decide what is right. Right is always right. I don't care who votes for it or against it. Stealing is wrong. It is prohibited by a moral absolute, isn't it? And we're going to examine that moral absolute. In the Old Testament, Exodus 20:15, we are taught, number 49, thou shalt not steal. In the New Testament, we learn in Matthew 19:18 that Jesus taught, number 49, thou shalt not steal. I cannot think of one civilization in the world that doesn't punish stealing, unless it's done by the government. It is wrong to take the property of one and to give it to another. It is called stealing worldwide. Man does not have the right to steal. If man creates government, man can only give to government those rights he has himself. Man does not have the right to steal. Man does not have the right to give government a right that he himself does not have. God's commandment, number 49, thou shalt not steal, has changed to man's commandment, number 50, thou shalt not steal, except that portion of thy neighbor's wealth which exceeds thine own. Or, number 51, thou shalt not steal, except by majority vote. I don't care what you call it, it's called stealing. You can't change it by changing its name. Government is now doing what an individual cannot do. If a man steals because he is hungry, he goes to jail. If a government steals because a man is hungry, it is called welfare. And if a man objects to the government stealing from him, he's the guilty party and he goes to jail. But what if the majority wants government to steal to give to the poor? Does the majority have that right? Does each individual in that majority have the right to take from one to give to another? Of course not. One man takes the property of another, it's called stealing. The majority takes the property of the minority, and it's called welfare. Why? Taking the property of someone is called stealing, whether it is committed by one man, a few men, the minority, the majority, or the government. It's still stealing. Now, we've been warned about the concept that the majority is best able to decide for the minority. This was written in 1931. Number 52. The adoption of democracy is fatal to good government, to liberty, to law and order, to respect for authority, and to religion, and must produce chaos from which a new world tyranny will arise. Notice what the end result of democracy is, according to that quote. It is tyranny, and tyranny is total government. And we're going to see why democracies inevitably end up in tyranny a little later. James Madison, a past president of the United States, said this in the Federalist Papers in the late 1770s. Madison said, number 53, democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found to be incompatible with personal security or the rights of property. Democracies, according to James Madison, destroy the right to private property. They voted away. John Adams, one of our founding fathers and the second president of the United States, said this, number 54. There never was a democracy that did not commit suicide. Democracies commit suicide. They destroy themselves. And we're going to see once again a little why in a few more minutes, a little later tonight. Another of our founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton, wrote this on June the 21st, 1788, number 55. It has been observed that a pure democracy would be the most perfect government. Experiences prove that no position is more false than this. The ancient democracies never possessed one good feature of government. Their very character was tyranny. Another who wrote on this subject was G.K. Chesterton, number 56. You can never have a revolution in order to establish a democracy. You must have a democracy in order to have a revolution. In a democracy, everyone plunders everyone by majority votes. You keep finding majorities to take away from all the minorities. The solution, a strong tyrant will appear to put an end to the plunder. He says, you've been messing it up, I'll change it around. I'll stop the plunder, and the people will freely give that power to the tyrant. And you'll end up with total government. Now, how do A, B, and C protect themselves from D, E, F, and G? All men have an equal right to own property. If each man has an equal right to own property, each man has an equal right to protect himself against someone who comes to steal his property. It is called the right, as I said, to self-defense. Each man has an equal right to hire a bodyguard to protect himself. Each man has an equal right to join together to protect himself and the others by hiring themselves a collective bodyguard. That collective bodyguard is called government. Men create government to protect their individual and collective rights to life, liberty, and property. Let's go back now to the Declaration of Independence, number 57. Our founding fathers wisely said this: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men." Our founding fathers understood the right to private property. They created government to protect inalienable rights to life, liberty, and property. I have one question I'd love to ask any politician, and I encourage you, after you hear this, to ask every politician you come across during these election campaign years. I say to him, I can tell by your answer to one question whether I can dare trust you with my vote. And inevitably, I'll have the politician say, I'd love to try it. What is it? What is your question? And I say simply, I can tell by your answer to the simple question, what is the function of government? Whether I can trust you as government. And you can't believe, in 24 years of asking that question, of probably over 100 candidates, I've only found one man, a state senator here in Arizona, that understood that governments are created to protect life, liberty, and property, period. All the others give me these phony answers that show they don't understand what powers they have. I've had answers like, government exists to do those things the people can't do. Wait a minute. I thought we were the government, we the people. Oh, we're here to help the people by force. That's what they're saying. We're going to take to help the people. Who does that help? And then I had a senator tell me, a national senator, whatever my conscience tells me, that's how I vote. That's what government's to do. And I said to him, Senator, I fear you because that's the power of a dictator. Whatever I decide is right is right. I fear you. It had no effect on that senator. All of these gentlemen are wrong except the state senator. The function of government is to protect man's right to life, liberty, and property. James Madison, the fourth president of the United States, said this, number 58. Government is instituted to protect property of every sort. That alone is a just government which secures to every man whatever is his own. That is not a just government where property is violated by seizures of one class of citizens for the service of the rest. Another of our founding fathers, George Washington, also spoke about government. George Washington wrote, number 59, government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. And like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. We fear fire because we know of its destructive power. We should also fear government because of its destructive power. I want to illustrate that very quickly. We're running out of time. About what Washington tried to tell us about the power of government. Washington said, government is like fire. Forgive me, that's a candle burning. If fire gets outside of its proper confines, it'll burn down your house. It'll destroy you. But candles are very useful. We use them to see things. You light up a room with a candle. We fear fire, and the way that we protect ourselves against fire is we build a furnace wall around it. At this very moment in my home, I'm not there, there is a fire burning. It's inside the furnace walls of my furnace. The reason I'm safe is because it's inside the furnace walls. As long as it stays there, I'm safe. If fire gets outside of the furnace walls, my house will be destroyed. As long as the furnace wall protects me, I'm protected. Washington said government is just like fire. We need government to protect our rights. That's why we create it. How do we protect ourselves from this power, this force? we build a wall around it called the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution is to protect us from the power of government. If we allow government to get outside of the Constitution, it will destroy us, just like fire will. Government is our most fearful servant and a fearful master, a dangerous servant and a fearful master. And to protect ourselves, we create a Constitution to protect us from government. Another who wrote about government was Ayn Rand, a writer of many novels on individual freedoms. Here's what she wrote, number 60. There are two potential violators of man's rights, the criminals and the government. The great achievement of the United States was to draw a distinction between these two by forbidding to the second, meaning the government, the legalized version of the activities of the first, meaning the criminals. The government was set up to protect man from criminals, and the Constitution was written to protect man from government. Thomas Jefferson quite often spoke about governments and its purpose. Number 61, Jefferson wrote, "Free government is founded on jealousy and not in confidence. It is jealousy and not confidence which prescribes limited constitutions to bind down those we are obliged to trust with power. In questions of power, then, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution." Now, there are basically two types of constitutions. I know a little bit about the field of property insurance, and I've been told, and as I know, you can cover property either under an all-risk method or a named peril method. Under the all-risk method, everything is covered except that which is excluded. So you read the exclusions to find out if the peril is covered. Under the named peril form, all the coverages that are covered are listed. If it's not listed, it's not covered. Article 1 of the Constitution lists the enumerated powers of the three branches of government. By the way, that's the entire Constitution in that little book. Section 8 lists the powers of Congress. There are only 19 powers. The 10th Amendment, number 62, reads, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people." The Constitution is a named peril form of document. The powers of Congress are listed, and there are only 19 specified powers. In other words, we told government, you have the following powers, and that's it. We also said in the 10th Amendment, if you don't have the power listed, you don't have it at all. Right now, today, the space race is orbiting, taking our money to count the moons of the planets. Where does it get that authority? We'll continue our discussion next week as we continue to search out the secrets of history. Thank you very, very much.
Is produced.
Welcome to Secrets of History, a series of lectures exploring the conspiratorial view of history. It is the contention of historian Ralph Epperson that wars, revolutions, and depressions are planned years in advance, and that those who have been involved in the planning of these events have been ensuring that their involvement has been removed from recorded history. It will be Ralph Epperson's purpose to discuss the major events of the past and to remove the veil that has been utilized to cover up the secrets of history.
Welcome to Secrets of History. My name is Ralph Epperson, and I'm the host of this series of lectures. Tonight is session number 3 of our discussion of the conspiratorial view of history. We're going to cover tonight various forms of government, and we're going to see why we create it, and then secondly, what type of government we should create when we do so. I've been studying this conspiratorial view of history for 24 years, and about 2 years ago, I wrote this book called The Unseen Hand, and I subtitled it An Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. We're going to be taking excerpts from that book during this series, and as I said, we're going to be covering government tonight and a little bit about it and what form we should use when we create government. I want to finish last week's session, if I may, just very briefly. We were discussing the creation of welfare, the taking of property from one by government to give to another. And I wanted to say that very many people believe that now is a right, that people have the right to private property of someone else. I want to give you some evidences from the past that there were those who didn't quite agree with you. Here's a view agree with that particular position. Here's a quote from the former President Grover Cleveland, who said this, number 65. I do not believe that the power and duty of the general government ought to be extended to the relief of individual suffering. The friendliness and charity of our countrymen can always be relied upon to relieve their fellow citizens in misfortune. Federal aid in such cases encourages the expectation of paternal care on the part of the government and weakens the sturdiness of our national character, while it prevents the indulgence among our people of that kindly sentiment and conduct which strengthens the bonds of a common brotherhood. In other words, Mr. President Cleveland said government did not have the power to take from one to give to another and call it welfare. And as we discussed, I believe that is also the position we should take today. I don't believe it's right to take from one to give to another. I want to go back about 130 some years to a gentleman by the name of Frederick Bastiat. You might pronounce that Bastiat, but I pronounce it Bastiat because I'm not French. But he was a French statesman, economist, and author who wrote a book entitled The Law back in 1850. This little book, and I highly recommend it, is perhaps the most brilliant book ever written on government. It was written in 1850 by Frederick Bastiat. And if I could be dictator for one day, I would make it mandatory that all Americans read this book. And I encourage you to get a copy as well. We're going to see what Bastiat tried to warn us about this concept of using government to take from one to give to another. Let's read number 66 from the book The Law by Bastiat. When a portion of wealth is transferred from the person who owns it without his consent and without compensation, and whether by force or by fraud, and to anyone who does not own it, then I say property is violated, that an act of plunder is committed. Now I want to just for a moment distinguish between plunder and stealing. Bastiat uses the word here to mean stealing, so whenever we use that word, you can transfer that to the word stealing that we use far more commonly today. Let's continue now with number 67. Bastiat says, how is this legal plunder to be identified? See if the law takes from some persons what belongs to them and gives it to other persons to whom it does not belong. See if the law benefits one citizen at the expense of another by doing what the citizen himself cannot do without committing a crime. As you just saw from the book The Law by Bastiat, there are two types of plunder, two types of stealing. One is a form of against property, a form of stealing against property, and he called it plunder, the taking of property from one to give to another. The secondly is by using government to benefit one person at the expense of another by taking property through government. So we can see that Bastiat was trying to warn us not only about welfare, but also about benefit acquisition by using government to acquire benefits over other citizens inside the society. Bastiat continued, number 68, in his book, The Law. Then abolish this law without delay. If such a law is not abolished immediately, it will spread, multiply, and develop into a system. I ask you, in America today, 1987, has plunder developed into a system? I think you would agree with me that it has. Let's continue now with Bastiat. As long as it is admitted that the law may be diverted from its true purpose, that it may violate property instead of protecting it, then everyone will want to participate in making the law, either to protect himself against plunder or to use it for plunder. Here Bastiat is warning us once again that evil people deny people their God-given rights to life, liberty, and property, and that people will use government for the purpose of plundering other citizens, either by taking their property from themselves and giving it to them, to the people doing the plundering, or they will use government to grant benefits to them to the exclusion of the rest of the society. He said here that briefly, one abridgment, one slight encroachment of this philosophy leads to another, and the end result is a complete system where we end up with everybody plundering everybody. Once again, I urge you to read this book called The Law, the most brilliant book written about government that I'm ever been made aware of. I read it about 20 years ago, and I recommend it to you again as well. Martin Van Buren wrote this quote in 1837. He was the 8th President of the United States, number 69. Those who look to the action of government for specific aid to the citizen to relieve embarrassments lose sight of the ends for which it was created and the powers with which it was clothed. It was not intended to confer special favors on individuals or on any class of them. Franklin Roosevelt, who made some very unusual statements during his lifetime, made this statement, and I think you'll agree that it seems like Roosevelt said one thing and did another. But here's what he said, number 70, about this violation of rights. The Constitution gives Congress no power to legislate in the conduct of banks, of business, of agriculture, of education, or of social welfare. Washington must never be permitted to interfere in these areas of our affairs. Unfortunately, we must ask the question whether or not Roosevelt believed that, because obviously when he became president, he certainly didn't believe that anymore. He got government into every aspect of our life. So something changed him, and we're going to talk about that philosophy that changes people from stealing, from no stealing to stealing, and we'll cover that throughout this series. There is a call today for the government, number 71, to provide food, housing, education, medical care, a job, and recreation. This is called the welfare state. And I love to, for those who say government should provide all these services, say to them there already is a place in society today, right now, we don't have to change, that is providing food, housing, education, medical care, a job and recreation for the people. It's already being provided in number 72 in prison, isn't it? In prison, it is the government's purpose to provide food, housing, education, medical care, a job, and recreation. We punish people today by taking away a criminal's right to provide these things for himself. Russia is a welfare state, isn't it? And frequently when a prisoner in that welfare state comes to play for the Russian basketball team, he defects. Why? Because he wants to provide those things for himself. In other words, America is becoming a prison today where the government provides services for its people. And there are two classes of people in a prison, those that give the benefits and those that receive them. And those that receive them are not free. People are not perfect. Some people don't respect another individual's right to life, liberty, and property, so men create government to protect their God-given rights. Now the questions are, if we're going to create a government, how much power must we give that government, or should we give that government? And secondly, what form should that government take? If we're going to create government to protect private property, then we will admit that government is essential and necessary. So we're now going to examine those various forms of government that are available to us if we're going to create government. Abraham Lincoln, one of our past presidents, and I believe one of the greatest presidents America's ever had, said this, number 1, no man is good enough to govern another man without that other's consent. And we're going to see today where government is operating without the consent of the people. Now we've agreed that government is necessary, so therefore the type of government known as number 2, anarchy, which is defined as no government, is not an option. We're not going to advocate anarchy because anarchy is no government at all. And I contend that government is essential to protect individual rights. We need government, therefore we're not going to consider anarchy as an option. There are three basic forms of government. One is called theocracy, that's government by God, number 3. A theocracy is a government by God, and I'm not going to discuss that either because if God wishes to impose a theocracy on us and we don't want it, we're going to get it whether we like it or not. And if we want God to govern and he doesn't choose to do so, then we're going to get it, we're not going to get it either. Therefore, it's not an option for us until God does decide one way or the other. As long as men rule themselves, we've got to create government through men. Number 4 is, we're going to now discuss rule by men. Number 4 is defined as rule by one, meaning a dictatorship or a monarchy. The problem here is that around the dictator or around the king, the monarch, is a ruling clique, a group of people that tell the dictator or the monarchy, the king, how to run the government. It's not very often, but quite often we'll read in the newspapers where dictators actually get fired. If you'll go back to the early 60s, I believe it was, Nikita Khrushchev was actually fired by the government of Russia, yet we claim that Russia is a dictatorship. It's not at all. We also read quite often where kings or monarchs get assassinated because the king or the monarch is not doing what the clique around him wants him to do. So therefore, a dictatorship or monarchy is not a viable option either because the people don't rule, a small minority does. Let's talk about rule by majority, number 5, called a democracy. Now, to understand the word democracy, we've got to understand the word demagogue. And let's define that, number 6, right out of Webster's. To understand a democracy, we must understand what a demagogue is. Number 6, Webster's defines a demagogue as a speaker who seeks to make capital or social discontent and gain political influence. In other words, demagogues lead democracies. One man leads democracies. And we're going to find out that not only one man, but quite often several men lead the majority, and that's one of the dangers. I want to define the word democracy from the 1928 U.S. Army Training Manual. This was the little booklet given to our soldiers in 1928 by the government. And it defined democracy, and we're going to see that the definition of democracy from the definition that has existed for hundreds or if not thousands of years has changed, even in America. Number 7, this is what our government said about a democracy in 1928. A democracy is a government of the masses. Authority is derived through mass meeting or any form of direct expression. It results in mobocracy, and we'll define that in a minute. The attitude towards property is communistic, negating property rights, and we'll explain how that works as well. The attitude towards law is that the will of the majority shall regulate, whether it be based upon deliberation or governed by passion, prejudice, and impulse, without restraint or regard to consequences. Results in demagogism, that's the rule by one in a democracy, license, which we're going to define in a minute, agitation, discontent, and anarchy, meaning no government at all. Now that's been the definition of democracy for thousands of years. All over the world, people understood that the democratic form of government leads to dictatorship, to tyranny. And we're going to see how that works when we study it a little more in detail in a few more minutes. Something happened to that definition of democracy, as we're going to see, because in 1952, the Army changed its definition in the thing called the Soldier's Guide, which I presume was intended to be given to the soldiers in 1952 to explain to them what government was in America. Number 8, the government said, democracy. Because the United States is a democracy, the majority of the people decide how our government will be organized and run, and that includes the Army, Navy, and Air Force. The people do this by electing representatives, and these men and women then carry out the wishes of the people. What happened to the anarchy, the discontent, the mobocracy, the communistic attitude towards private property in the understanding of whether or not this was a democracy? Something's changed, and that's changed by design, as we're going to see. Our government now is a democracy, and it's leading us towards the negating of private property rights, the increase of anarchy where suddenly the mob rules rather than the majority. Now, for those who say this is a democracy, let me ask you a couple of questions about we controlling the government. And of course, you can't respond to this because you're listening, but answer these questions yourself. How many of us voted for welfare? And secondly, if we did on a national referendum, what would happen? Secondly, how many voted for the war in Vietnam? And secondly, how many wanted the war to be won? And if so, if we did vote on it, what would have happened? In other words, quite often, we are not given the chance to vote, and if we were given the chance, the government does things we don't want them to do. So I say that not only is this not a democracy, and we're going to find out what it really is in a few minutes, if we did vote, we wouldn't get the type of government we've got even today. Secondly, quite often in an election, less than 50% of the voters actually vote, which means the majority then consists of only 26% of the people. And that is certainly not a democracy. So we're going to see here in a few minutes what some of the dangers are of democracy. We're going to continue our study of the various forms of government. Nearly 200 years ago, a British professor named Alexander Fraser Tytler wrote this, number 9. A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can exist only until the voters discover they can vote themselves largesse, and largesse means money, out of the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidate promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that democracy always collapses over a loose fiscal policy, always to be followed by a dictatorship. Answer the question, where is America today? Do we today have a loose fiscal policy? And then secondly, what is the end result of that? We're going to cover that in a few more minutes to show you what will happen if we allow it to continue. There's another form of rule by man, number 10, where the minority of the men in the society, or a few men, rule, and it's called oligarchy. Now, we don't use the word oligarchy in our vocabulary today, but our founding fathers understood when they created this government in America. They knew that this was not a republic, a democracy, that it had the danger of being an oligarchy, and they tried to limit the will of the majority, as we're going to see in a few more minutes. Unfortunately, today, we've changed from a democracy to an oligarchy where only a few run the government. America is being run today by an oligarchy, as we're going to see. Actually, all forms of government are oligarchies, except one that we'll cover in a minute. As I said, the dictatorship exists only as long as those around the dictator want the dictator to function. Monarchies have their councils, their people surrounding them, their advisors, and those advisors make sure the king is removed when he doesn't do what he's told. And in democracies, as we've seen, a few control, either one man, a demagogue, or a few, an oligarchy. What other form is there then if we don't have a democracy? If we can't have a theocracy, is there a form of government that man can create that will protect him against democracies, demagogues, and the mob? Yes, there is. There's one last form that we've not discussed. It's number 11. It's a rule by law or a republic. Under a republic, the rights are protected by law. The majority cannot vote those rights away. The minority's rights are protected. One man or a minority, all of them have their rights protected by government. Our founding fathers understood that this was a republic, and when you read the Constitution, you'll read such phrases as, Congress shall pass no law. What if the majority wants Congress to pass a law? Why shouldn't they have that right? Because our founding fathers feared democracy. They created a republic, a rule by law. Number 12, there are three basic differences between a democracy and a republic. And for the purposes of our definition, let's not call democracy democracy. Let's call it what it truly is, an oligarchy or a rule by a few. In a democracy, it is a rule by men. In the case of an oligarchy, it's a rule by a few men. In a republic, it is a rule by law. Congress shall pass no law. I don't care what the oligarchy, what the minority, or what the majority wants. In a democracy, the law restricts the people. The people vote, and the people are restricted. In a republic, the law restricts government. The purpose of the Constitution is to protect us against the will of the majority. Congress shall pass no law. Number 13, and this is perhaps the most important distinction between a democracy and a republic. Under a democracy or an oligarchy, might makes right. You get the majority to agree, and that's what happens, whether it's right or wrong. The majority wants something, and they get it. If the majority wants to take away the rights of the minority, they vote it, and it happens. In a republic, right makes might. I don't care what the democracy says. I don't care what the oligarchy says. When it's right, it's done. Now let me try to explain the differences by use of the blackboard. You'll have to forgive me for my rather crude drawings, but as I said last session, I find sometimes that the basic simple diagrams can illustrate some very profound thoughts. So let me draw here. These are two buildings. By the way, I live in Tucson, Arizona, where we have a set outside where a lot of Westerns are made. And I'm going to describe briefly what I call a Class B Western. And we're going to show you how that Western, where good guys shoot bad guys and bad guys shoot good guys, that basic distinction of that basic plot of this Class B, Grade B movie illustrates the difference between a democracy and a republic. So forgive me. Here we're going to have a tavern. Every old Western town had a tavern. And I'm going to draw here, these are the swinging doors, so that you know that's a tavern. And I'm going to put a couple of characters in here. We're going to, in this corner, put a man in a white hat. And then we're going to put over here the man, this is going to be a black hat. Of course, I have to draw it in yellow. Now, we're going to have a fight in the tavern. This always starts in our Grade B movie, where the guy in the black hat walks in and sees the man in the white hat over here, and they start a fight. The man in the black hat says to the man in the white hat, "You're a coward." He said, "No, I'm not." He said, "Yes, you are. You're a lily-livered coward. You don't fight. You don't do anything. You just sit there." And the guy says, "No, that's not true. Just leave me alone." And this man provokes the fight. So the man says, "Stand up and draw like a man." This guy finally, reluctantly stands up and says, "Okay, you're right." And I'm provoked into it. So they draw, and this man kills him, shoots him dead. Now, down over here is the second building in our story. This is a jail, and I'm going to have to draw the bars on the windows and the doors to show you this is a jail in our western town. And over here, John Wayne is seated, and I'll have to draw John Wayne's big white hat. John Wayne is in jail. He's the sheriff in our story. John Wayne hears the shot and comes running down the street into the tavern and says, "What happened here?" And the people in the tavern say, "Here's what happened, John Wayne. This man came in with the black hat. This guy was quietly minding his own business. This man provoked him into a fight, and he shot him dead." Well, okay then. And the people say they kind of make a few little rumblings. That's right, that's what happened. So John Wayne takes the man in the black hat down to the jail and puts him behind bars. So now we've got this man dead in the tavern. And then the next step in the scene is a man stands up on a table and says, "Did you see what just happened there? This man came into town and shot down this poor little shopkeeper who was minding his own business. He called him a coward and killed him." "Yes, we saw that." Well, he says, "What are we going to do about that?" "Well, we can't let that happen, can we?" "No, we've got to lynch him," the man says. "We can't let that happen in Summersville here. We're going to put a stop to that." All those in favor of going down and lynching the man, and this demagogue, this man is a demagogue, he leads the people down the street. He says, "Let's go and lynch the bad man who came into town and shot down our shopkeeper." Now, during this discussion of whether or not they should lynch him, a couple of people say, "No, I don't think we should lynch him. That's not right." But let's just say, for instance, there are 50 people inside the tavern. So they decide. 47 of them say, "Let's go down the street and lynch him." The demagogue has talked the 47 people into lynching the bad guy. And let's say that 3 people resist. Down the street comes the mob. Now, when 47 to 3 vote, that's called a democracy. The majority have decided to lynch the man who came into town to shoot the little shopkeeper. It's called democracy. Down the street comes the mob, or the democracy. The democracy does not respect the man's rights. When they get down here to the tavern, John Wayne steps out with a shotgun and says, "What are you guys doing?" "Well, John Wayne, we just decided in the tavern, we saw what happened. We've come to lynch the man who shot down our shopkeeper. He provoked the fight and killed him." What does John Wayne say? "Sorry, fellas, not today. The man has the right to a fair trial. He has the right to defend himself. He has the right to be heard by a jury of his peers. I don't care, John Wayne. We, the democracy, have voted. We, the people, say lynch him, don't they? The rights of the minority are not protected by the majority rule, are they? The majority, the democracy, the mob says lynch him. John Wayne says he has the right to a fair trial. John Wayne becomes the republic, a government of law. Now, this is the key to understanding this. John Wayne has got to convince the democracy that this man's rights are protected by John Wayne, just like anyone else that was caught that did not commit the crime and was about to be lynched. All men's rights are equally protected. All men have the right to a trial by jury. I don't care what the democracy says. I don't care what the mob says John Wayne. If he doesn't convince them, the democracy, then the republic will fall. Hopefully, John Wayne can convince these people and they'll go home. If he appeals to them and says, rule by law, not rule by men, rule by democracy, then this man will have a fair trial. After the trial is over and they find him guilty, then the democracy can lynch the criminal. Hopefully, that little illustration of this class grade B movie that you've seen 1,000 times in your local drive-in will illustrate the difference between a democracy and a republic ruled by law. Ben Franklin, when he was leaving the Constitutional Convention, when he helped sign the founding document, was stopped by a lady and was asked this question, number 14. "What type of government have you given us, Mr. Franklin?" asked the lady. Ben Franklin replied, "A republic if you can keep it." John Wayne has got to convince the people that all men's rights are protected by John Wayne, whether you're guilty or innocent, until after trial. A republic if you can keep it. Ben Franklin tried to warn us, do not let the people, the demagogue, the mob, the democracy destroy the republic. When they want to destroy it, they have the power to. You've got to convince them there is a difference between the two. A republic today is a dirty word, isn't it? Number 15, China, the communist country of China, calls itself the People's Republic of China. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Russia today, neither of these are republics in the true sense, and that is also done by design, because America is not a republic, we're told, it's a democracy. Only communists have republics, and that is so far from the truth that it's almost disgusting. In fact, it is disgusting. America is still a republic being violated by the rights of the majority. There are only two types of government. Number 16, government by a few or an oligarchy, or government by law, a republic. We must make our choice. Our founding fathers made that choice. They created a republic in the United States, not an oligarchy. And today we're discovering that the oligarchy is running America, as we're going to see. I'd like to briefly discuss the differences between the so-called terms right and left. They say if you're a conservative, you're on the right wing, and if you're a liberal, you're on the left wing. I want to show you what those two terms mean to show you that those who believe in a limited republic are not on the right at all. They're in the middle. Let's go to number 17. Here we've got government influence on the left side just by tradition and history. I want to put on the left side total government, 100% of government interference in your life. Over on this side, we're going to put communism, socialism, fascism, oligarchy, and democracy. Now, I want you to understand that a democracy does not have to be on the left, but in most cases, as we've already seen, it ends up over there where there are no minority rights, where the oligarchy or the majority tramples on the rights of the individual. A democracy can be over on the right side, but in most cases in the past, as we've seen, a democracy controls things like communism controls things. On the right side, if you want to talk about number 18, if you want to talk about government interference or influence on your life, zero influence would be anarchy. The right wing today are anarchists. They believe in no government. Where does that put those who believe in the Republican form of government? number 19, smack dab in the center. I believe in the limited form of government, the Republican form of government. I'm in the center. I'm neither on the left nor on the right. In a republic, all men's rights are protected by government. That's the difference between the two types of government. And today, it doesn't seem to matter to government. Today, we're losing our rights, and we're no longer in the center in a republic. I want to talk briefly about how democracies are used by unscrupulous people. In 1948, a communist by the name of Jan Kozak wrote a book called Not a Shot is Fired. John Kozak described a pincers movement, that he called it, to take over representative government. Jan Kozak was a communist, and in his book he talked about what he calls the pincers movement, and you can use this strategy to take over a representative government without firing a shot. What he said was that you've got to have a conspiracy. Well, in fact, let's do it this way. Let's go back a step, and let's get this slide up of the government on the top and the mob on the bottom. Let me illustrate this by explaining that this is like a vice, and you turn this up and down vertical device, and the two arms either go together or apart. The second part is you've got to have a government at the top and the mob on the bottom, and the third party in this is the conspiracy that controls both parts. Once you understand Jan Kozak's pincers movement, then suddenly American history will make some sense. You control the government, and the government controls the mob, and together the people are squeezed out. Number 20, Kozak's book was subtitled Not a Shot is Fired, but its real title was How Parliament Can Play a Revolutionary Part in the Transition to Socialism and the Role of the Popular Masses. In other words, you can convert a democracy into total government by this strategy and not fire a shot. I want to briefly give you a couple of examples to show you how this strategy works, and then we're going to show you how it was used against us in America during the Vietnamese War. I want to cover, first of all, Adolf Hitler, the dictator of Germany during World War II, prior to and during World War II. You might remember that Adolf Hitler was actually elected by the government, by the majority, by the democracy in Germany prior to World War II. And let me briefly explain to you how this occurred. Adolf Hitler used the strategy of terror, the mob, the brown shirts he created to go out into the streets and create havoc. 3 o'clock in the morning, the German citizen would have his door rapped on, he'd open the door, he'd be taken outside, beaten to a bloody pulp, and then kicked back inside. This type of terror started to get people very, very frightened, obviously. Ceaseless, unusual terror where there was no right or there was no wrong. It was just mad terror. Adolf Hitler then said, look at what government's doing. You give me the power and I will end the terror. And he could do that because it was Adolf Hitler who was causing the terror with the brown shirts. The people decided they wanted to end the terror. They listened to Adolf Hitler and they voted him into office. He controlled both the government and the mob and ended up with the government in power. Adolf Hitler was voted into office, and when he stopped the terror by calling in the people that he sent out to create the terror, Hitler was hailed as a hero. It's the same strategy that is being used today over and over again. Hitler used it very effectively during the times prior to World War II. This is also the technique that was used in the Vietnamese War. For reasons I'll discuss later, I believe it was our intent, the intent of our government, to prolong the war. And now I'm going to show you the strategy they used to continue the war, even though the people did not want that to happen. The conspiracy that we're going to discuss created the mob, the anti-war protesters, to convince the American people to prolong the war. And here's how it was done. Let me try to illustrate that by illustrating this, what happened during the Vietnamese War. I'd like to start with this brief little paycheck here to illustrate a point. This is a copy of a paycheck, I made it up here, that I got during the Vietnamese War in February 1971. I wasn't worth very much money that week, but I earned $1.98. But there's something that's far more important to this that I want to point out. On this check, my name, Ralph Epperson, is on the top line, and the boss's name is on the bottom line. As long as I did what this man said, and as long as my name was on the top, I'd better do what I was told. If I was making dishwashers and the boss said, make dishwashers, and I was in the upstairs factory making cars, I wouldn't stand there very long. I wouldn't get paid very long. I wouldn't get my paycheck. If I was upstairs, was out in front of the building carrying signs saying the boss is a pig, down with the boss, how long would I get my paychecks? As long as my name is on the top and the boss's name is on the bottom. In other words, the boss calls the shot. As long as you do what the boss tells you, you keep getting paychecks, don't you? During the Vietnamese War, other paychecks were being issued. Here's one made out in February 1971 to the U.S. universities, the government schools who were receiving billions of dollars in federal aid to education from the United States government. And once again, here we've got someone issuing paychecks to someone receiving the paychecks, and then the next question is, as long as those paychecks continued, it is presumed that the government liked what it was getting out of the universities. What was the product the universities were turning out during the Vietnamese War? The anti-war protesters. That means that the government wanted the universities to turn out anti-war protesters, anti-government protesters, because all during the war they continued to get the paychecks. If you produce for the boss, you get paychecks. That's the way it works. Did the universities get fired? No. That means that the government wanted the anti-war protesters to be created by the government. Secondly, I want to also cover another interesting aspect of the Vietnamese War that's also very important, and we'll cover this in far more detail in about session number 20 or so. We're going to get into the Vietnamese War in far more detail, but I want to illustrate this next point to show you how the second part, the anti-war protesters and the Vietnamese vets, were used by the government. They were created by the government and used by them during the war. In Vietnam, we have here the North and the South. As you know, it was divided into a North and a South. This is the port of Haiphong. Now, during the war, we have these Air Force bases down here with these million-dollar jets parked on the runways, and we've got these radar installations and missile sites up here around the port of Haiphong. The port of Haiphong is being used to transport goods into Haiphong to take goods in there to unload them for the North Vietnamese to kill Americans in a war. Now here we've got this $6 million jet aircraft down here on the runway built by the American government in South Vietnam, and the pilot is assigned the task of going over here and blowing up this missile site. That's his job. So he gets on board the $6 million aircraft, loads it up with the latest technology and bombs and missiles and radar and radios, follows orders, goes up here and blows up this missile site. When he gets over here, past this missile site, he discovers that this missile site fires on him. He has no instructions to do anything about that. His orders are to destroy this one, and when his wingman gets shot down, that's the end of it. He keeps on about his job. In fact, during the Vietnamese War, I read of an instance where a pilot actually flew this route, blew up this missile site, but as he was flying over there, his co-plane, the one beside him, his wingman, got shot down. When he landed, he reloaded his plane, put more ammunition on it, went back over and blew up this missile site because it had killed his partner. When he got back to the Air Force Base, he was court-martialed because he violated orders. He was not to touch that missile site. This causes strange thoughts amongst the fighting men, doesn't it? Now, the second thing about that is the port of Haiphong. It has ships in it here that are being unloaded to unload these missile sites. As he flies over here, he looks down and sees this ship being unloaded with hundreds of missiles, radar, the whole thing, and he's not ordered to destroy the ship in the harbor and then the next day they unload it, and that missile maybe shoots down his neighbor. Very strange things going on in the Vietnamese War. We never blockaded the port, did we? Also, on the ground over here, we'll go over to this side. Here's this hill with this is in Vietnam, and here's this Marine base, let's say, $16 million built by the taxpayers, and here's a battalion or something of Marines protecting this Marine base. Over here we've got the Viet Cong. They crawl up on top of the mountain and start lobbing shells into the missile base, into the Marine base. As that happens, little Sergeant Culpepper from Atlanta, Georgia, is ordered to take his squad up there and blow up this Viet Cong and kill them because they're launching missiles or dropping whatever these rocket launchers or anything down into the Marine base. When he gets up there, he doesn't keep the top of the mountain. He comes back down and goes back to his barracks. And when he does, his 10 men are now down to 8. So he says, okay, next week the Viet Cong crawls back up and starts launching more missiles or wherever these things are on the Marine base. He takes his 8 men up the hill, cleans that nest out, comes back, and now there are 6. After a while, the poor little guy starts to figure out, this doesn't make much sense, does it? Why don't I keep my objective? Why don't I go up there and protect this hill so this doesn't happen? And this happened over and over and over again in Vietnam. After a while, Sergeant Culpepper from Atlanta, Georgia starts thinking, this doesn't make sense. This whole war is madness. I don't want to be here. Why don't we win and get out? The pilot says, this doesn't make sense. Why don't we win and get out? Why don't we blow up this ship? Why don't we blow up these radar sites? Why don't we end up by taking this hill and protecting it? We don't do that. And unfortunately, in this area, drugs are very economic and very inexpensive. These fighting men over there that can't make sense out of the war turn to something that makes some sense to them, drugs. It helps them forget this madness. Now when they come home, they're not accepted as heroes. I was in New York at the end of World War II as a young boy, and I saw the response from the American people when our fighting men came back. We welcomed them back as heroes. I saw a ticker tape parade where thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, I don't know how many troops came marching down the street, hailed as heroes. When the Vietnamese soldier comes back, he's hailed as a scumbag or something. He wasn't welcomed. And he turns to drugs in this country. And lastly, this is one of the reasons why the Vietnamese War was prolonged this way. When he comes back, the price of drugs goes up, doesn't it? In Vietnam, let's say the price of something is $1. In America, it might very well be $50. He turns to his drugs. He says, now I need $50 to get my drugs. I can't get a job. No one likes me in this country. They believe I didn't win the war. I didn't want to win the war. They believe all I did was go over there is take drugs and blow my mind. So he now has to break into your house to get his money for his drug habit. If we had won the war, brought him back as a hero, I don't believe he would have turned to drugs. Now that he breaks into your house, you demand, here's the mob, the guy breaking into your house, you demand more action from government. The people in the middle, say to government in the Pinchers movement, please do something about this. Put an end to the breaking into my house. And when they do that, they clamp down on the drug addict. The price of drugs goes up, doesn't it? Now he has to break in and get 2 TV sets. When he does that, we demand more action from government, more legislation, more police, more laws to control the drugs, and the vice starts to squeeze, doesn't it? One of the major reasons for the war, as we'll cover later, is to create a drug culture so this vice can squeeze. More laws, more government, and nothing happens. It was a device used during the Vietnamese War to control, and now especially for us to pay for it. Let me show you a couple of interesting things also to further my contention that this war was a madness. During the Vietnamese War, what did this symbol mean? I want to get up on the screen there a slide of this man here giving this V sign with his fingers. That means peace, doesn't it? That's what we were told during Vietnam. We were told V for peace. Now, what does V got to do with peace? I don't know. This slide shows Winston Churchill, who was giving identically the same sign with a V for victory sign. During World War II, this symbol meant victory. Why did they change the symbol? Because victory in Vietnam was not an option. We did not want to win in Vietnam. And then if they had wanted that, all of us would have been going around V for victory. They changed the symbol because victory was not the goal of our government during the Vietnamese War. Also, the media got involved. Anytime 3 people carried a sign, the media was there. 100,000 people marched for victory in Vietnam, and the people were busy. During the war, and we'll cover this in far more detail later, Russia supplied 80% of the war materials for Vietnam into the one port of Haiphong. America was sending the goods to Russia to kill Americans. Some people figured that out. This is a petition that was circulated during the Vietnamese War. Over 4 million people signed this petition. Shame on America. Stop helping America's Marxist enemies. 4 million people said stop the aid and trade going to Vietnam, going through Russia to Vietnam. 4 million people said stop it, and the media was busy. They did not cover that story. And I dare say there's probably very few watching this program tonight that had ever heard that story, that our government sent materials to Russia, Russia sent those materials to Vietnam to kill Americans. Some people wanted it stopped. The media said leave it alone, and Congress said that as well. That petition was sent to Congress. It was sent to the President. They knew there were people trying to awaken the American people to this going on in the Vietnamese War. It never happened. There were really only two alternatives offered during the Vietnamese War: either end the war or support your government in whatever policy they wanted. Number three, the only option you should give an American fighting man, victory, was not considered. It was not intended for America to win that war in Vietnam. Let's put all this together. Let me try to show you how this whole thing worked during the Vietnamese War. With an actual illustration, this actually happened to me firsthand. This little part of the story happened to me. I was working in Portland, Oregon during the Vietnamese War in a very tall skyscraper building in Portland, and this road led down the street like this to a campus, a university that was receiving these paychecks from the government during the war to turn out anti-war protesters. So one day I'm up here working, and down the street comes the mob, the anti-war protesters. So I said, I want to go down there and see what this is all about. So I walked downstairs to the sidewalk and watched this mob come down the street. Some very interesting things were happening. First of all, they were carrying the American flag. Now, when I was a boy, I was taught that when the American flag comes by, you stand up, put your hand on your heart, because the flag stands for the Republic. We should respect the flag. So they brought the flag down the street. I stood up. I was very proud to see our flag being carried. And then they stopped, and right in front of me, they burned the American flag. I said, that's strange. If they want me to join their cause to end the war, why do they burn the flag in front of me? I love that flag and the Republic for which it stands. That didn't make sense. And then a few rows later, there was another flag carried in this parade down the street. It was the Viet Cong flag, the flag of the enemy killing Americans. And that flag was held up high by the demonstrators that came from the universities that were saying anti-government thoughts. That didn't make sense either. Also down the road came a van. On the top of the van was a man with a battery-powered megaphone. Now I'm not going to use the word because I don't use it, and I certainly couldn't use it on this television station, but they were saying this, and down the street all of these people were repeating it in chant, all in unison. And the slogan went, they were saying with this battery-powered this megaphone, 1, 2, 3, 4, we don't want the war. Now that I deleted, it's an expletive. It was a foul word. If I said that word on this television set right tonight, I'd be cut off the screen. So down the street, they're burning my flag. Down the street, they're carrying the flag of the enemy, and then they're using words like that I don't use, and they're trying to get me to support their cause of ending the war. I thought, that's very strange. And they're coming from a university where my tax dollars are being used to turn out people that hate the government, want to end the war. So I started thinking, why did they do that? And then the media, when I went home that night, I turned it on, and there was the media reporting on this scene down the street, and they said, if you want to end the war, this is what you do. And they showed me the burning of the flag. They repeated the word over and over again of this man on the megaphone, with the megaphone. And they showed the Viet Cong being carried. And then they said, these are the only two options you have. Either you support the war or you end it by burning the flag. Victory was not an option. How do you convince Mrs. Housewife, who's got her son in Vietnam, to end the war? She doesn't want her son there. You get a petition, and you go up to her with a suit and a tie on and say, Mrs. Housewife, Mrs. Mid-America, please sign the petition. Let's end this war and get out. You don't do this. It was not intended for them to end the war. They were intended to prolong the war. Our government's policy was to continue the war by creating the mob on the bottom, look down into the mob and you see this burning of the flag. You see this carrying of the Viet Cong flag. You hear these obscenities. You look to government. Government, do anything you can to stop that. And their solution is prolong the war. Support your government. My country, right or wrong. Those were bumper stickers being used in the Vietnamese War. The strategy, control the mob, control the government, and you prolong the war, squeeze out the middle of the people. And it worked. Vietnam, here is the message of Vietnam and all this tragedy. Number 21. It is a simple and ugly message. Here is what happens to those who put their trust in the United States. Those boat people that are still leaving Vietnam are telling to the world, if you trust America, don't trust America. We're going to cover the Vietnamese War in more detail later on to show you that our government intentionally created the anti-war protesters, intentionally created the Ho Chi Minh communist government, then used the anti-war protesters, intentionally prolonged the war. They decided intentionally not to win the war. They used the media to convince us to support our government and not win the war. And the many of the protesters who were actually out in the streets carrying the flags, demonstrating, using foul language, did not know or understand. It's the old pincers movement described by Jan Kozak. The mob in the streets and the government controlling it and the conspiracy controlling that by tightening it, and the vice grows. Next, let's get into some basic economic terms to understand why some people operate as they do. Let's start with a discussion of basic differences between a consumption good and a capital good. Everything in the world is either a consumption good or a capital good. And let's describe that with number 22. Let's define the two terms, consumption goods and capital goods. A consumption good is created for consumption, obviously, and I'll give you a brief example. Food is a consumption good. A capital good is produced to help you acquire consumption goods. In other words, the car that you use to go to your job is a capital good. When you get there, the wages are capital goods, and when you buy food, that's the consumption good. Every society uses capital goods and consumption goods. There's not one. In fact, let's use a brief example of the Aborigine in the deep jungles. If he eats rabbits and that's his food, then the rabbit is a consumption good. If he makes a blowgun to assist him in acquiring the rabbit, the consumption good, he produces a capital